Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today, I am going to interview or kind of shoot the breeze with a retired sheriff from North Carolina, and he is going to share his Dogman encounters and experiences with us. I talked to the gentleman about a year and a half ago, and he was not ready to share what he has seen. He shared with me, but he was not ready to share either for me to narrate or to share in his own words. He contacted me yesterday and he was ready. So tonight I am going to introduce you to Lewis from North Carolina. Before we get into that, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help this channel to continue to grow and go. All of those links are in the description below. I also have a second channel for creepypasta, fan fiction, and scary voice acting. Stories that, well, they really don't fit on this channel. Now, if that's anything that you're into, follow that link and give those stories a listen. You may just like what you hear. Now I've taken enough of your time, guys. Let's get on with today's upload, shall we? All right, everybody. Tonight I've got a really great guy. I've chatted with him a couple of times, and he's had quite a few Dogman encounters. He is a retired sheriff's officer from North Carolina. His name is Lewis. Lewis, say hi to everybody.
Hey, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well tonight. All
right, and you were talking earlier that you had roughly 5 encounters.
Yes.
You want to start from the beginning and share with everybody what has been going on with these? Because you said you think you're cursed with these guys. I think it's where you live, you know what I mean? Because you're out in the woods, and so the floor is yours, brother.
All right. Well, my first encounter was back in 1970. I was 5 years old. I had just started school. We had lived in Charlotte, and we had moved up to Gaston County, close to Spencer Mountain and McCaddenville. My father had lung cancer, and the doctor wanted to get out of the city, so we did. I was 4 when we moved there, and I had started school. I guess I was in school for about 2-3 weeks, and my mother, she never liked it up there. She just always had a bad feeling about that place. And I remember it had rained the night before, and I wanted to go out and play, with my toys. I had some Tonka trucks and stuff. And Mom said, "Okay, well, I'll let you go out, and take a towel with you." And she knew I was going to be sitting in the dirt. Well, I have to explain how this house was. It was actually a duplex, and when you walked out the back door of the kitchen, there was like a 10 by 10 deck, and it was like 20 feet off the ground because the house was built on a hill that sloped. And you walked out on that deck, and then you turned to the left and would go down a set of steps right up against the bricks. And then there was another, about 10 foot down, another area, about a 4x4 area, and then it turned to the right, and you went down to the ground. Well, the ground was mostly red mud and had quartz rocks. There was a little bit of grass, and I remember sitting there playing, and the way it was the yard was in the back. It went down probably about 40 yards to the best of my recollection, and somebody had cleared out most of the trees that just had oak trees, and they were in a line, different lines. And as you went down farther, there was a little creek, and on the other side of that creek, it was just thick pines. Well, I was out there probably 15, 20 minutes, and I caught something in front of me, and it was white and grayish looking, and it was huge. Now, I watched a lot of cartoons, and to me, it looked like a polar bear, and that's what I thought when I first saw it. As crazy as it sounds, but I seen it go, and it kind of went out of sight, and I continued playing with my dump truck and stuff, and then I happened to look up, and it's closer, and it's coming back to the left in the line of trees, and there's like 4 or 5 rows of trees that comes up from that little creek, and I watched it, and it went all the way to the right and vanished out of sight. I kept playing, and then I looked up again, and it was a row closer to me, and it only had one more row to come up to where I was at. I was about 10 foot from that first row of trees, and I started focusing on this thing, and I wasn't scared. It reminded me of a polar bear. It was almost cartoonish. And then I just continued to watch it, and this thing was huge. Now, I guess I was probably 3.5, 4 foot tall, and this thing was on all fours, and it would have been at least 2 foot taller than me when it was coming by. And when it got to the last row of trees, it stopped, and it was right dead in front of me. And I remember just looking at it, and it had its head down. It didn't look at me, and all of a sudden, it turned its head and looked at me. And that's when I started getting scared, and something just didn't feel right, and I could see its teeth in its mouth, and its eyes was red. Just maybe it's just because I was so young, but they looked like coals. They were just so red, and this thing was white, and it had like gray patches on it, and absolutely huge. And so I started scooting back a little bit, and it growled. And when it growled, I stood up. And when I stood up, it stood up. And my dad was, pretty tall guy. He was like 6'4", and this thing would have towered over my father. And it just looked at me, and I remember just in such fear, and I couldn't move. I don't know why I didn't scream out then for my mother, but that's coming. This thing, when it stood up, I could see its chest, and it was a pinkish color, and it had orange mud on it. And I could see the muscles that this thing had, and it was just the biggest thing I had ever seen. And I knew then that something wasn't right. And I started to take a step backwards. And when I did, I tripped over my Tonka truck. It was a little tanker truck. And I fell ass first in a mud puddle. And when I hit that, this thing let out a growl that I could feel all through me. and it was like electricity. Then I started screaming, and I started going up the first flight of steps backwards, like a backwards crab crawl. And I remember trying to go up those steps and find each step. And this thing started taking steps towards me. And I made it up to the first platform, and it went down on all fours at that time. And I was screaming and crying. And I just remember the fear in me. And the next thing I know, I had a big jolt from behind me. My mother had grabbed me by the back of my shirt, and my ass was off the steps. The only thing that was on the steps was my feet, and they were clicking coming up. She was dragging me up the steps, and my shoes came off. I remember that. And she was screaming, "Go back to hell, go back to hell." And I was screaming and crying, and when she got me up to the top, she opened up the door and just slid me in, and she went in and shut the door. Well, this thing started coming up the steps, and it came all the way up to the very top and stood up. And me being young, I know this going to sound kind of crazy, kind of funny in a way, but me being young, you know, you think your parents is going to protect you. And I remember my mother shutting the blinds and looking up through the glass of the door, because she had to look up to see this thing. And I remember her standing by the door with a broom. She had a broom in her hand. And I was like, you know, thinking then, you know, I think about it now, you know, what was Mom going to do with that broom, you know? But Mom called my father, and my father told her to immediately, because Mom was just going off, and my dad could hear me screaming and crying in the background. And my father told my mother to call the law, and so she called, and my father was on the way home, and he got there probably 10 minutes after, and he drove all the way from Charlotte, and it didn't take him long. He must have been flying, but when the time he got there, there was 4 or 5 sheriff deputies with shotguns, and they seen the prints that were on the back porch, you know, and how big they were, and they were talking amongst each other, and my dad showed up, and of course jumped out and run in with his pistol, and, you know, they told him, you know, to put his pistol down, that they was going to handle it, and my dad was very upset and just wanted to make sure me and Mom was okay. And it was just something weird about that place. I'll tell you something real quick. When I was 4, when we first moved there, I guess it was a few months after we had moved there, and it was Christmas Eve, and me and my mother were sitting in the living room watching TV, and I was sitting right beside of her, and the Christmas tree was right beside the TV, and we're waiting on my father to get home from work, and all of a sudden there was this loud growl that came from inside the house, and the Christmas tree was like somebody grabbed it and shook it as hard as it could shake it. The balls were flying off the tree, lights, everything was flying off the tree. The tree was snapped, the top of it was snapped off, and there was busted glass everywhere. My mother had snatched me up, and we were scared to death. And that kind of, my mother, like I said, she really didn't like that place. There was something just not right about it. It was haunted or something. And so after the Dogman, and I didn't know it was a Dogman, you know, being that young, you know, I just knew something bad happened, and I'd never seen anything like that, and from the reaction of my mother and everything. But after the law enforcement left, I remember my mom and dad having an argument, and my mother telling my father, I'm packing up now, and me and your son are leaving. If you want to stay here, be my guest. Well, the next day, we moved. That was my first encounter with something like that, and I was terrified. And after that, and I don't know why, but do you remember the Pillsbury Doughboy? You remember him?
Yeah.
Little Pillsbury. Every time it would come on TV, I would start crying and screaming and tell my mother I hated that Pillsbury Doughboy. I don't know why. I don't know why I put those together.
Kids do the craziest things,
Yeah, I really don't. No.
So after that, you guys moved. How much time passed before you had your next encounter?
Well, what happened after that? Now, when I was 16, there was my father passed away when I was 15, and when I was 16, me and my mother was talking, and friends, and she had told me a story about my grandfather. And my grandfather lived in Bessemer City, North Carolina, and he started the first taxi company back in 1929. And he had 3 taxis. He had 2 drivers, and then he drove one. And this was a hush-hush story that was in the family that nobody talked about. And my grandfather one night he wasn't living right. He was drinking and all kind of other stuff, and but he ran his business, supposedly, I never got to meet him. He passed before I was born. And he had picked some people up at a shack, or I'm trying to think what they called them back then, but it was illegal to drink.
Was it like a speakeasy? A speakeasy?
Yeah, a speakeasy, exactly. So he picked up 2 couples, 2 men and 2 women, and they wanted them to drive them out to this shack, and it was all dirt roads back then, and it was like 10 miles out in the country, and I'm sure what was going to go on in there. But anyway, they paid him $50 to take them out there and sit in the car and wait on them until they were done. And they paid him for like 2 hours to sit there. $50 was a lot of money back then, and so he was sitting in the car asleep, trying to get some sleep, and the car rocked, and he thought it was maybe them ready to go, and he yelled out and said, "Hey," because he didn't know how long he had been asleep for. He said, "Hey, y'all ready to go?" And he got no answer, and he just sat there for a minute, and the car rocked again, and he happened to look up, and there was this, how he described it was the devil. He said it had red eyes, and it was tall, hairy, it looked like a dog. It had the pointy ears, he actually thought that it was the devil. And he cranked the car up, and he started hauling butt. Well, this thing jumped up on the running board of the driver's side of the car and was staring in at the window and growling at him. And it jumped off the running board 2 or 3 times and would jump right back on. He had the car floored, was trying to get away from it. And when he got back home, he was so scared when he got home, because this thing jumped off when he got out to the main road, and but it was still a dirt road. And when he got home, he was so scared that he didn't stop the car. He drove the car up on the porch into the living room. And the next day, he sold his taxi service, and that was on I think a Friday night, is what they said, and he was in church and got saved that next Sunday morning. It changed his life forever.
I remember when you first told me that story. You told me that about a year and a half ago, and that was one of the stories that I've heard throughout, the couple of years that I've had this channel that stuck with me, because, your granddad was terrified, and just, that shows the amount of fear that he's flying home and just, he's like, I'm just going to park it inside the house.
Yeah, exactly. He made a drive-through, But, I mean, I can't even, imagine what he must have went through, and I don't know how if people seen Dogman back then as much as they do now.
I think they did. I think it was just harder I think the internet age is what brings so many encounters out. You know what I mean? Like the stories can travel faster nowadays, with the internet. I think if they had the internet back then, there'd probably be about the same amount of encounters, maybe even more, because times were different. But, I think it's just, I don't really think there was a too big of a jump, you know what I mean? A lot of people are like, well, how can there be so many encounters that, you're doing one a day, and I'm like, well, most of the encounters that I'm doing are from years past, and it's just because of the internet and Facebook and all the other social media platforms that put people into touch with each other. Because you live in North Carolina, I live in upstate New York. I wouldn't be able to talk to you. I wouldn't even know who you were if it wasn't for the computer. So I think that was the big thing that brought all of these encounters, that we can kind of lump them all together. So now your second encounter was what? How old were you when the second one that you had happened to you?
I was in my 30s when my second encounter.
Were you a police officer then?
I'm sorry?
Were you a police officer then, a sheriff?
No, okay. No. I had a pretty good life. I raced motorcycles for Honda, professional. And then I went to work for Ford Motor Company. I was an engineer for Ford for 14 years. Then I opened up my own business, and that's where my second encounter happened, in Rowan County. And I lived off of Highway 3. I was living in Rowan County when Dale Earnhardt was killed. And I used to do a lot of work for his mother and family members at my shop that I had there. And anyway, I had a towing service too, and a couple of my drivers had told me of things that they had seen at night, but they thought maybe it was a bear, but they didn't know if it was a bear or not, and because it would get up on 2 legs, and and I really didn't put two and two together on it because my second encounter with one of these things, I was living at the end of a dead end road, and it was kind of out in the country off of Highway 3, and in Rowan County, and there was a big cow pasture field at the very part of my backyard, and the other part was woods, and then there was a big stream on the other side of the pasture, and then there was another cow pasture that did have cows in it. Well, I was married, and me and my wife would go down to that creek and pan for gold, and we'd find little gold nuggets, and we'd just do that on the weekend. And we were down there, we had done it many a times, and, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. One of my friends, from New York had came down, visiting, and, I had just bought me a new Harley Davidson, and they came over to have dinner, and they were going to stay for a week, and he was going to hang out at the shop. Well, anyway, we have dinner, and I had a dog named Chewy, and he was a chow, and I had him on a runner in the back, and it was a real long runner, and I mean, he just had it made. Good dog, and I would, let him off. He would, come in the house and go for rides with me and stuff. Well, they were there at the house, and we had dinner, and we had played some cards, and Chewy was in the backyard just going crazy. And I looked out a few times and never seen anything, out the window. And so it was, I guess, about 11 o'clock, and they were getting ready to leave, and we opened the door to walk outside, and as soon as I opened the door, this smell hit us. And the only way I can describe it is like a skunk, the worst skunk, and death, and like a cow, a wet cow or something. It had that animal smell, and I thought it was possibly a skunk because Chewy was shining a flashlight back there, and he was in his doghouse all the way up as far as he could get in the doghouse. And I was like, mess with a skunk, he got you. So didn't think too much more about it. They left, our friends, and the next morning, me and the wife got up because that would have been on a Friday night, and it was Saturday, and we went down to the creek to do a little gold panning, just goof off. And when we got to the edge of it, it was like a 10-foot dip to go down in there, and it was sandbars. And my wife said, "What is that?" And we were standing up there at the top, and I looked down, and I said, "Man, that's a footprint." And she said, "What? Couldn't make that kind of footprint. That thing's huge." And I said, "I don't know." So I started going down into the creek, and she's like, "No, don't get down there." I said, "No, I want to see what it is." So I went down and looked at the footprint, and it was probably 14 inches long and had claws on the front of it, and it looked like a dog print, but stretched out. It looked more kind of like a cat print, like a big cat, but no cat could have a 14-inch. It was kind of skinny. It just got skinnier as it went back. And whatever the thing was, I started following it, and my wife wanted me to come back. She said, don't follow that down the creek. You don't know what that thing is. And Desert Eagle. I grabbed that thing, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to go see where that thing went and what it is." And she gave me down the road about it, but I went on down there, and I went through the creek, and whatever this thing was, it had like 4.5 foot strides. And it was intelligent enough to walk around the water and onto the sandbars. It would skip the water. And I come to a point where on the other side of the creek where the cow pasture was and the cows were, where it had went up, and there was cedar posts that had barbed wire on it, and that one of those posts were snapped off at the ground. And I was like, well, whatever it was strong, heavy at least. And I followed the tracks back, and they went through the field, and this field was made of bull talon, which is that's you know what bull talon is? It's where a cow pasture used to be, and it's all hard, real. If anybody's ever tried to dig in bull talon, it's just hard dirt. But there was prints, and I followed those prints, and they came right up behind my house. And I showed my wife that, and that freaked her out a little bit. And it was about 2 weeks later. I was out on the back deck, and the deck wrapped around. There was a patch of woods there, and the deck come from the back door and come out and come around almost to the front of the house, and it ended right there. And I had my grill and everything set up, and I had one of those yellow porch lights, and I had a couple of T-bone steaks on the grill. And I guess this was about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And I was hearing something, and it was dark, and I kept hearing something that sounded like something was breathing. But I couldn't see, because those yellow lights aren't that bright. We had a floodlight on the house too, but we never cut that floodlight on, and I had a grill light on the grill that just hung over the grill so that I could see the cooking. Well, there was a little window right there that me and the wife would pass food through, and she was making our salads and baked potatoes, and I was doing the steaks, and I knocked on the window, and I told her, I said, "Go get my pistol and my flashlight." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Just please go get it for me." And so I've got the grill open, and I go to cut the flashlight on, and the flashlight batteries are dead. And I told her, I said, "Cut the floodlight on." As soon as she cut that floodlight on, what I saw in front of me, I will never forget it for the rest of my life. This thing was standing there, and 10 feet away from me, and I couldn't see it. The fur on this thing, it had pointy ears, and I was standing on a deck that was about 3.5 foot off the ground, and me and it were eye level, and I'm 6 foot tall. So this thing had to be 8.5, 9 foot tall. Muscular, shoulders were about 4 feet wide, ripped. Would have put Arnold Schwarzenegger to shame. And it was, the color's hard to describe. It was like, what fiber optics look like? Has the ends of fiber optics is like kind of a sheeny color.
Yeah.
and that's what it looked like. And this thing had the face of a German Shepherd, but its head was the size of a 14-inch car tire. I mean, I was in shock, and everything happened so fast. It was just staring at me. Well, what ended up happening is, now this happened within like a second of what I just told you there. When she cut that light on, my wife automatically started screaming. The dog was in the house. The dog started going crazy. And when I seen this thing in front of me, I had a beer in my left hand that I had set on the grill, and the grill was open. And when I seen this thing, I jumped backwards, and my foot hit the bottom of where the wheels were, and the grill slammed shut. And when the grill slammed shut, this thing jumped. It was like it scared it. And its ears went backwards on its head. It leaned down a little and dug its foot in like a linebacker would do. And all I seen was teeth. And I started cussing. I just knew I was a dead man. And I pulled my pistol up, and I just aimed it straight at its face. And I was cussing it and telling it, come on, you SOB. You're gonna get me, come on, but I'm gonna get you too. And it just sat there and looked at me, but with his ears pulled back on his head like that, and especially when it dug its foot in, I could see it twist its foot in like it was getting ground, like it could leap. And this thing put its head up in the air, and its ears went back forward again, and it looked at me and went, as if to say, you're not worth it, and turned around and just walked off. And 2 steps, he blended in, and I couldn't see him anymore, but I could hear him, for a good 10 seconds going through the woods. And that was my second encounter. Now, I moved from there to where I'm at now, which is about 40 miles away. And when I first moved here, I've got 7 acres of land. When I first moved here, I was a hunter for a long time when I was younger. And when I moved up here, I started hunting, and I fished more than I hunted, but I'd still hunt, because a lot of the people I met, my friends around here, they hunted too, and a lot of land behind me, thousands of acres at one time. They've started developing a lot of it now, but I went back in the woods, and I put deer stands up. I got a couple of nice deer, because I thought I had got away from these things. But obviously they're everywhere. I mean, or it's just my luck. I really don't know. But I lived here for 5 years before anything ever happened here. And I had built a pond. I got a stream down there, and I had diverted my stream and built a acre pond, and was gonna put a log cabin down there beside the pond so that I could put a little paddle boat in. I had bought a paddle boat and stuff, and I was gonna stock the pond, and for the time being, I had put Malibu lights down through the woods and cut me a nice little trail. And I built a bridge across the pond, and it was, it was wide enough for a 4-wheeler to go across it. And so I had bought me a Coleman tent, and I said, well, I'm gonna put the tent down here and stay, spend the night. And everything was fine, and at like 3 o'clock in the morning, I never seen them except for the silhouettes from the moonlight over the tent. But there had to be at least 3 of them, and they were circling me, going around the tent, growling, those deep growls. I could hear the hard footsteps, and I'm laying in the tent in my underwear, and I've got my pistol with me, but I was scared to death to use it. Now, if something would have stuck its head in there, yeah, of course I would have used it. But for a good 35 minutes, these things circled that tent and were knocking down tree limbs and growling, and I didn't know how many was there, but I figured there was at least 3. And when they went away, I heard them start going away back down to the other stream about 500-600 yards away. I jumped up out of the tent in my underwear and ran all the way back up to the house in my underwear and just left everything else down there. And the next morning when I came down, the tent was tore all to pieces. I mean, it was down, it was all ripped up. And then I've had a couple sightings. Last year when we talked, I know I sent you a photograph of one that was standing in the woods by a big oak tree.
Yep. Hey, speaking of that picture, do you mind
if I still have that?
Do you mind if I use that picture for the thumbnail for this video?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'm going to use that so everyone can see the picture that you're talking about.
How much time do we have left?
I've got about 5 more minutes of recording time.
Okay. I'll try to make this quick then.
See, guys, hang on real quick, Lewis. What we're going to do is I've got X amount of time to record. So I'm going to do tonight's upload, and then tomorrow we're going to finish the recording. That way you guys can have his whole experience and encounters with these. So I apologize, but there will be a part 2 tomorrow night. So sorry about that, Lewis.
Oh, that's fine. I can tell you about the experiences I had in law enforcement.
Yeah, we'll do that tomorrow night if you want. Is that cool?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
All right. Mm-hmm. All right. So, this is crazy. I remember one of the things that you told me is that you feel cursed by these things. And to be honest,
it's like they everywhere I go now. I mean, well, there's been years that I didn't see them. My first experience, when I was 5, and then I'm in my 30s when I have my second one. But it's like I move, and I'm having them up to this day, and I shared something with you that I'm sure we'll share later on that really devastated me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that, I don't think you're cursed. I think what's going on is, for some reason, you've got really bad luck running into these things. Because of, like, the choices, like you said, you were on an old creek, your first place, and you were right up butt into the woods.
There's always been water involved.
Right. And I'm thinking that's a lot to do with these encounters, because out in Oklahoma, the gentleman that shared his encounter out there, he had a stream on a large amount of property, and there always seems to be a good source of water and a good source of game around where these things are spotted. And that was one of the things that Victor shared with us is, they will always be around those areas. So I don't think it's that you're cursed. I think it's just the choices of where you've lived. Like right now where you're living, you're on 7 acres pretty far back, and that's perfect area for them. So
I'm wondering if I move to the coast.
Live in a high rise or something, you know what I mean?
Something, I don't know.
But all right, so guys, tomorrow night we're gonna revisit Lewis and finish the rest of the interview. Once again, guys, I apologize. It's the software that I have to use. So with that, I'm gonna bid everybody a farewell. Lewis, want to say goodbye to everybody?
Yeah, I want to tell everybody good night, and thanks for listening to my encounters.
Wow. Now, if you think tonight's encounters that he has shared with us are pretty interesting and crazy, wait until tomorrow night when he shares some of his law enforcement experiences. And he had mentioned a encounter that had just recently happened. I don't know if he's going to be able to share that with us. Hopefully he will. I know that it's actually had a traumatic effect on him, because when he was telling me what had happened just recently, I could hear the fear and confusion in this gentleman's voice. So anyway, tomorrow night we will revisit with Lewis. I want to thank everybody for all the support, and I want to bid you farewell.